In 1790, as he lay dying, Benjamin Franklin decided to perform one final experiment. This one wouldn't involve a kite or a key, but rather the compounding power of time. In his will, he left 1,000 pounds sterling to both Boston and Philadelphia, about $4,400 per city at the time. But there was a catch. Franklin didn't want the money to be spent immediately. He mandated that the funds be placed in a trust to be lent out to young married artificers, the apprentices and tradesmen of the day, to help them launch their businesses. His instructions were precise. For the first 100 years, the money was used exclusively for these low-interest loans. Franklin knew his bequest would grow, and he planned for its evolution. He stipulated that after the first century, roughly 1/4 of the sum would continue to fund these loans, while the remaining 3/4 could be used for major public works in each city. He understood a fundamental truth. Education and trade are the engines of a free society, but they require a foundation of capital that most young people simply don't have yet. By the time the trusts were fully distributed in the 1990s, Franklin's original $8,800 gift had ballooned to roughly $6.5 million. It eventually funded trade schools, science museums, and thousands of educations. Franklin didn't simply give money. He planted a forest he would never even sit under. As parents, we face a similar task. The cost of tuition is a mountain that seems to grow taller every year, and the pressure to fund it all can feel overwhelming. But true stewardship isn't about hitting a random number on a spreadsheet. It's about preparing the next generation to use their talents for God's glory, whether that's in a lecture hall or a workshop. Today, we're going to talk about how to build that foundation without sacrificing your own financial peace. Welcome to Plan to Prosper, where we exist to honor God by helping faithful servants steward their finances wisely and build wealth that endures for generations. All right, well, welcome to another episode of Plan to Prosper. I've been out for the past couple weeks because my wife and I had a baby on St. Patrick's Day, which was really fun. And now Logan's out. I can't even remember what he's doing, but we have Sam Stair with us from our office. Welcome,
Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah. I'm glad to be back. Congratulations on the newborn.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Logan is in Massachusetts.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Working from up there.
So we're him and I are tag teaming the podcast lately, going back and forth a little bit. But we will be back together at some point, I assume. It's just not today.
Yep.
Today, I get the pleasure of Sam.
It's good to be back.
And congratulations are in order for you as well. You have some news.
Yes. Yeah, I passed the CFP exam. I am not technically a CFP certificate yet, but I'm going to get my marks probably this summer. So it's a exciting time in the sense of being able to be past, get past this big test.
Totally.
Have my time back, and I learned a lot from studying and from taking and passing the exam. So it's a big accomplishment for sure.
It's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, we will glean some of that wisdom today as we discuss our topic, which is funding your child's college education.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that is super important within the planning process, and one that people have a lot of opinions about, and so I'm excited to get into it today.
Yeah. In our cold open, we shared a little story about Benjamin Franklin, B. Frank, as I like to call him. And he had this quote that said, "An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest." So that's kind of what you're doing with college education. When you choose to help your child through it, you're investing your own capital in your child's future and in their mind, in their career, in the way that they think about the world. And so a lot of parents want to help their kids through this however they can. And we want to help give some overall guidelines that can help you think through how to do this in the most efficient way possible. None of these are hard and fast rules or personal advice for anybody. As we always say, this is just really generic guidelines that we like to, we'll throw out there for you to consider if you're thinking about this in your own children's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have 200 or 300 years, whatever it is, to see that compounding interest play out in our kids' lives.
Yeah.
Nor did he see it. That's true, but it happened.
Right.
But there is still so much value even in, the 18 to 20 years that you have before a child goes to college if they do. And so, yeah, I completely agree. It's good to talk about this, and excited to get into it.
For sure. And so I think the first thing that we would want to start with is what we're mostly going to be talking about today is how to do this if you decide that you actually do want to do it. I think you need to sort of answer this question for yourself first. If you are a parent with young children pre-college years, and you're thinking ahead to this, you need to decide whether this is something that you want to prioritize or not. And we certainly don't think it should happen at the expense of your own retirement plan. If you have a plan already in motion and your cash flow is tight, and funding a $40,000 per year college would be very difficult for you, we wouldn't recommend pulling from your 401k to pay for your kids' college, for instance.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think when education planning starts to come up, it feels like it's better to, sacrifice by giving to your kids, which, sometimes can be true, but for the most part, you want to set yourself up well, for your retirement so that in the future you can be more generous. But the sacrifice of your retirement, for the sake of a child's education, for the most part, can be, just a bit dangerous, because then you could be leaving yourself in a hole where, especially with both of these topics, there's just so much unknown in the next 20, 30, 40 years. If you have a child, in your 30s, you just don't know what's going to happen in the next, 20 or 30 years. And so there's just a lot of variables in that where, that's what's helpful about, planning early, is that if you're set up, if you start to have that trajectory of being set up for retirement, then you can get to education planning. But it is important to be in that place where you're comfortable with the retirement planning first. And so that's what we're going to get into. Once you're comfortable there, then this is where the education planning starts to really come in, and you can start to discuss this with an advisor or look into it yourself.
Yeah. And one of the greatest gifts you can give to your child is to be financially healthy yourself.
Yeah,
because
exactly. Yep.
If you ruin your own retirement plan to provide and be extremely generous with your kids, which is a commendable thing to do, you might end up actually being a burden on your kids later. And we don't want that.
Exactly.
It's by the Bible, it's clear that parents should save for their children, not children for their parents. And so part of that could be providing their college education, but maybe not. If you just can't swing it, you can't bankrupt yourself to do this. You really do. It's not selfish to prioritize your own retirement plan, because I think this more selfish thing would be, I don't even want to say it's selfish, but if you end up just being a burden on your kids later in life because you run out of money, we don't want that for you. So,
and that's where talking to an advisor is so helpful, because, people can have either, a view that they are on track when they're not, and they start planning prematurely for education, or they're saving too much to retirement, and an advisor can say, hey, you're good.
Yeah.
You can start thinking about your kids. It's mostly on the first, example of people don't know that they're not good looking at retirement. Usually parents in a good way are looking out for their kids and their education.
Right.
So we definitely see that first situation more. But yeah.
It is a delicate balance too, because like the earlier you can start planning for your kids' education, the less you have to save on an annual basis.
Right. Yep.
The later you start, the more you have to, all right, you've got to catch up here a little bit. So it's about finding that balance where you're not starting, you just are in a comfortable place yourself to be able to get to that place where you can start saving additional funds elsewhere beyond your own retirement.
Exactly.
But I also think the big question to answer for a lot of parents is my kid even going to go to college? Some parents don't even encourage, like these days are not encouraging their kids to go to college, or they're encouraging more thinking trade school or going an apprenticeship route. And that's a totally legitimate thing to help your kid think through. But some kids have the vision to, I want to be a doctor. And you're probably going to need to go to college for that. Yeah. That's also going to be really expensive and maybe very difficult to fully fund for your kid. But these are questions that you want to start thinking through. If my kid, I have a 3-year-old and he's into superheroes right now. So, but he's also into like building things and just kind of general mayhem.
Landscaping.
Yeah. Landscaping that's right. You know him better than I do. No. I don't know where he's ultimately going to go. But right now, maybe pushing him to go pursue philosophy or something is not going to be the best use of his college years.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like you do have to start to, make those decisions early on and almost like you don't want to gamble with it where you're just throwing all this money into a 529, for example, even though, they're 5 years old and you have no idea what they're going to do and you're trying to fully fund, super early on. I think you do have to slowly make these they're micro decisions that will then get, once they're 16, once they're 17 can really set you up well. So I completely agree. And there's just different philosophies on, or opinions on college. So it really does come down to the parent, and it does come down to once they're, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, your best guess on what they're going to do as well. So there's a lot of unknown, but there are questions that you can ask, and that you and your spouse can ask each other on your opinion, and it definitely matters if you've gone to college yourself as well. I think that plays into it as well, because some parents have not, and they don't necessarily want to send their kids, or they don't have a plan to send their kids to college on their dime, and so it can be a wide range, and when it comes to that question early on, are they even gonna go? Yeah.
And I also think if you end up at a place where you're just like, we cannot swing this.
Mm-hmm.
We're contributing every penny that we have towards retirement, and our plan's barely working right now. I think it's perfectly okay to put that on your kids.
Right.
To just go, having the conversations and just going, you're gonna have to. If you want to go to college, you're going to have to figure this out on your own, and either through student loans, grants, scholarships, all these things. And I think that could be a really great, as much as student loan debt can be a big burden on kids coming out of college. As long as they go into it with eyes wide open, understanding what they're getting into, coming out of college, I think it can often be a good responsibility. It was for me to suddenly, I owe money now. I have to start paying this. And so I need a job that's going to pay me. And it's like, welcome to the real world.
Right.
I have a responsibility to pay off this student loan that I agreed to pay.
Right.
And I think that can be a good lesson for kids.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's what everybody should do, that you should just load up on student loan debt. I'm not saying that at all. And we've seen people that have way too much student loan debt, pursuing way too expensive a degree when they're not making that much money. So I think, if it's really not feasible, I think that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like one of the best things that you can do that's not financial is starting to have those conversations early with a high schooler, where you're talking about what they want to do and what they want to pursue, and start to guide them on the path of making that decision together, because that can be more valuable than having a bunch of money saved up, in a 529.
For sure. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it." And so these conversations around finances is a way to train up your child. Mm-hmm. If you've just fully fund their college and you never really have conversations around it, and you just are overly generous with them without having conversations about how to be responsible with their money, they might get to the real world and start making good money and not knowing what to do with it because their parents didn't teach them about it. So I think teaching your kids good financial principles is a way to enact Proverbs 22:6 in your own kid's life. Yeah. It of course, instilling your faith and all these things is the heart of that verse, but I think just sound financial principles is really going to help them with their college decision.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a prerequisite to even starting to save, is just thinking about how am I going to have these conversations with the kids about, finances, and then especially education. So, yeah.
For sure. And so I guess you mentioned 529s for somebody that doesn't know what that is. Explain what a 529 is.
Yeah, it is an account that they're with. You can open 529s in different states, so there's different rules within different states, but for the most part, they're uniform more and more today. There's two big picture. There's two different types. One is that you can prepay tuition. Usually that's within your state. And so that is something that you are locking in. Usually the school will allow you to lock in a price early on. So I think, for example, Penn State, you could, send your kids to Penn State and lock in the price early on, and it's in-state tuition, and you're sending your kids to Penn State, and that's it. There's no other. I would say those are not very popular right now.
Yeah.
The general 529s. I don't know if there's a specific name for them, but they're 529s that you can. They're a lot more flexible, and you can use those funds for anything and everything when it comes to tuition. You can also use them for K through 12 now. So
yeah. So they're a type of investment account where you can save specifically for your child's education expenses, and the growth and the withdrawals are tax-free when used for qualified education expenses.
Right.
So it's like a Roth IRA in that growth and withdrawals are tax-free when used appropriately, but specifically for education expenses.
Right. Yep. Qualified education.
Yes. And so this is like the primary account that you would theoretically use for funding your if you've already made the decision, I want to fund my kid's college education, you probably are going to use a 529.
Right.
You don't have to. You could save for it in a regular taxable brokerage account or something, but it's just not going to be as efficient tax-wise.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get some extra tax benefits when you do it through a 529. And so the things that we're going to talk about today is like how to best. We spoiler, we don't think you should necessarily save every penny of their college expenses into a 529. We think there should be a little bit more flexibility in that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's assume you want to be even more flexible than a 529, and you go, I really want to help pay for my kid's college, but I'm concerned that they might not want to go at all. I'm concerned my kid's brilliant and he's going to get a full ride. I'm concerned that I'm not even going to need to use this for education. So what other options do I have if I want to be prepared for it, but I want to be able to pivot to something else if the time comes and I don't need this money for education?
Yeah. No, it's good. And the reason you would want to do that is because 529s are not very flexible. We could get into one way that they are, but they're not very flexible. If you put the money in, you contribute, and then your kid doesn't go, or there's no place to put money for education for your kids or anyone else, or even because you can use them for grandkids eventually as well. So that is the reason that you would want other options. So there's the UTMA. That is an account that's owned by the child. So you can be the custodian in the sense of you have the investment responsibility of the account, but it's owned by the child. And so those accounts are generally taxable. And they can be used for anything once the child. You actually can use them for the child in specific situations before they turn 21, but once they turn 21 in most states, those accounts are then given to the child who is no longer a child. So that would be an option. That it's just a lot more flexible. You not only are they flexible with the money that eventually grows, but also UTMAs have a lot more flexibility when it comes to investments. So that's one of the reasons why people like them is in 529s, you have but you do have strict investment options. Like you can't buy a stock in a 529.
Right.
So that's one of the side benefits of a UTMA. But UTMA is one. And then you can just save in a taxable as well.
Real quick, can we just talk about UTMAs a little bit more?
Sure.
You mentioned that you can use the funds. I think one of the dangers with a UTMA is if you really fund that like crazy, this is all money that will become your child's the moment they turn 21 or sometimes 18, depending on the state.
Right.
And you have no control over that. So if your kid potentially starts to go on a trajectory that you're not thrilled with, or they might not be responsible. This is another reason why having these conversations about finances, especially if you're going to use this type of an account, they better be prepared for that. Because if you fund it with $100,000 or $200,000 or more or less, like, and they're suddenly going to at 21 years old have $200,000, let's just say, at their disposal. What will they spend that on? Because you have no control over that anymore.
Right.
Like, it's all theirs. They could do whatever they want with it. So that's something to be mindful of, is really smart with educating your kid ahead of time so that they're responsible with that money and they don't come into that and waste it all.
Yeah, and it reminds me, in a previous role, I had multiple conversations with clients who, either they feel like the UTMA is theirs. So it's interesting, like the child will turn 21 and they have this connection to the UTMA that it's like, this isn't yours anymore. Yeah. And you really have to prepare yourself for that. And then the other side of it is that they don't tell their children that they created a UTMA, which, the reality is that if and when they do find out, that conversation, especially if they find out after they're 21, that can be an interesting conversation. But yeah, withholding that information for the most part can be kind of a dangerous decision. Yeah. Because it really is theirs. So yeah, you just have to, like we were saying before, so much about this is having a lot of conversations early. If you're married and with your spouse, and then having a lot of conversations with your kid beforehand, before they get to that age, because you're investing in their ability to, have that money once they get there. Right. Yeah.
You also mentioned that the money could be used theoretically before they turn 21, but it's pretty restricted with, it has to be obviously used for the benefit of the child. You can't use it to pay for a car for yourself or anything like that. You can't even use it to like buy birthday gifts for your kids, because it's kind of seen as that's your responsibility as a parent. You can't pay for food with it for your kids, even though your kids have to eat, and it is for their benefit. That's your responsibility outside of this account. Like you are a parent responsible for paying for your kids' birthday gifts and for their food and stuff. You can't use it for that stuff. Right. It has to be used for really specific things outside of that category.
Right. It's not necessary. Yeah. Yeah. So food and clothing and shelter, just because it's for the benefit of them doesn't mean that you can just pull from their UTMA.
Exactly. Yeah. So just be careful with that. It could also hurt your financial aid eligibility, FAFSA.
It can.
So that's something to be mindful of too if you're going to utilize that later.
Which a 529 can as well, potentially. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, all of these do come into play when you're applying for FAFSA. Yeah.
Other alternative accounts to a 529. We'll just hit these real quick.
There's a brokerage account, which, saving for anything, just like anything else, it's taxable once you sell the investments, and that's normal.
So if you're concerned about you're giving your kid $100,000 at age 21, you could just save and earmark it in your own mind. This account is it's all mine.
Exactly.
But I'm saving for the kid, and
yes,
if God forbid they just go in a direction you're not crazy about, or they wouldn't be responsible with all that money at age 21, well, the good thing is it's still in your name, so you don't have to give it to them.
Taxable account in your name, exactly. Yeah, so it's still in your control, and just like any other investments that you own. And then the other is there's a Roth IRA. The one point about the interesting thing about a Roth is that it gives flexibility. So I know you had in there a custodial Roth, but for your own Roth, there is an option also. If you have kids a little later, so let's say you're 40 years old and you have a child, an option is to open, if you don't already have a Roth open, is to start funding it so that when you hit that 59.5, you could use that for. So that's like the taxable in the sense of you're contributing to your retirement, but you could actually use it at the end for for education, and that's more of just an earmark in your head type of situation, just like the brokerage account. But then there's the custodial Roth as well.
Okay. Yeah, you can't withdraw. I mean, you could withdraw contributions from a Roth after 5 years.
You can at any time.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's at any time for contributions, but then anything else, there's rules and regulations around that, which you have to be very careful with. Yeah.
Which is 59.5 is when you could start pulling from a Roth.
Yeah.
Under all other circumstances without penalty. Yeah. So yeah, as you're saying, if you have kids in your 40s, probably that would get you to around the late teen years when they might be in college. So that makes sense.
Yeah. It still has the tax-free benefit that the taxable brokerage account doesn't. Yeah.
There is one other child account that's available now, but you have to have a kid last year in 2025 through 2028, which is the Trump account.
Yep.
So we just had a baby, and I'm excited to open a Trump account when they're not rolling out till July of this year. But
that's true.
That could be an option as well. The government gives you $1,000 of seed money to start with, and you can contribute to that as well. And I believe it is essentially an IRA for the child,
right?
So it's a retirement account, and it will become again like the become theirs at age 21, I think, 18 or 21. And but I do think I should have probably confirmed this before maybe I shouldn't even say what I'm thinking. That the child doesn't have to necessarily wait till 59 and a half to use that money. It could, without penalty, that is. I think there are certain circumstances like buying a first house that you could draw from on that account without that 10% penalty. Yeah. But you would still pay ordinary income on it.
Right. Yeah. I honestly haven't done enough research into the new Trump accounts yet.
Yeah, I should. Yeah. Well, just look into that yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have a kid this year or next year, consider that.
We could do a podcast episode on it in June or July once they come out.
Yeah. Yeah, I still think there's a little bit of uncertainty with some of that stuff, but the fact that you get $1,000 to start with,
exactly.
is
awesome.
It's worth taking advantage of if you're having a kid in these next couple of years. All right. So let's talk about then the math to get to a place where you figure out, well, okay, great. I've decided that I want to save for my kid's college.
Right.
How do I even start this? So let's first talk about how much should we save. And I think you probably want to err on being more conservative. And if a parent comes to us and says they want to save for college, but they don't have a specific college in mind, some parents do. Some go, I want to pay for a Penn State education for my kid, or I want to pay for whatever college, like an Ivy League. Yeah, we've had parents.
Big, right?
Yeah, they like, I want to be able to afford the University of Penn for my kids.
Right.
Well, we'll just look up the tuition rates and what they are now. Or if they don't have that in mind, we just lean towards about $40,000 per year is an approximate average for a typical college education and everything that goes with it per year for a 4-year school. And then we'll inflate that. So we'll add, it's typically a little bit higher than the rate of inflation, which we have running around 2.5% right now. It can be anywhere from 3 to 8%. College tends to inflate on an annual basis. So maybe use 5% as your inflation on the college expenses. So $40,000 per year in today's dollars, but that's going to increase 5% each year that you're trying to reach that number with how much you want to save.
Yeah. I bet there have been some frustrated parents the last probably 5 or 6 years, because I know that college inflation has severely outpaced normal inflation, or the CPI inflation. The last, just seeing what we saw in 2021 and 2022, I think even college outpaced that. So it's a good rule of thumb. And I think if you're past the place of, well, we just want to save something, once if you're beyond that and you're like, okay, we actually want to think about this a little in more detail, then I think those rules of thumb are great, and just expect to see the inflation rate of college to continue as it is, at and greater than what regular inflation is. So it's disappointing, but the reality of
we
education, exactly, and so you got to plan for it.
Luke 14:28 says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost to see whether or not he has enough to complete it?" So that's kind of the first step, is how much do I ultimately need to have set aside? If I'm going to fully fund my kid's college education, how much is that going to be? So that's a way to think about it. If you have a specific school in mind, look up the tuition rates and then inflate that by 5% each year. Also, you obviously need to know the time horizon, which you will. If you have a 5-year-old kid, you understand that they're 13-ish years away from this. If you have a 15-year-old kid, they're only 3 years-ish away from this. So you need to understand how much time do you have to save on an annual basis before they start college. You should also probably consider the way that you're investing in those accounts.
Right.
Again, you said in a 529, you're a little bit more limited, but you could lean it more conservative or more aggressive. And so if the kid's younger, probably 0 to 5, it can be more aggressive because you have a lot more time. And then once they get to the teen years, you probably want to toggle that back to be a little bit more conservative. And I think oftentimes the funds available in these 529s set it up on a glide path like that, so that
what we do.
They just become more conservative over time.
Right. Yeah. So you don't have to touch them. I agree. And what you have to watch out for is if you're doing this math yourself, considering, what is the amount. And this is where an advisor is really helpful. Is what is the amount that you need at the start of college to then pay for 4 years of college, in the sense of like, you're not just saving for, you're not just saving for college, up until 18. You then need to pay for it. And then you need to, account for inflation within those 4 years as well. So there's just like the details of, okay, doing the math of what do we need? And then what is, after we pay for a year, what's the growth of that year? What's the inflation of that year? And how do we pay for the next 3 years? So there's just the math of it. You do have to be careful and do a little research if you do it yourself of how you're getting those numbers, because people could be disappointed of, oh, I thought I had enough. Yeah. And you don't because of the accounting of inflation, especially in those years.
Right. Our strategy that we typically recommend is a 50-50 funding strategy, where you are aiming to provide 50% of that number, of that total number that you're like, again, let's say it's $40,000 for 4 years, $160,000 total in today's dollars again. You're trying to put half of that in a 529 by the time they start college. The other half, ideally in like a taxable brokerage account in your name that you have earmarked in your mind. And maybe you open an entire new account for that, or you just pull it all into your own taxable brokerage account if you already have one, and you just understand that some of this is set aside for my kid's college. So you're not putting 100% of it into a 529, but you're doing a 50-50 split, which again helps you with the flexibility of this plan.
Exactly.
So let's just use one example. Your kid is really, really smart. You've been funding their 529s their entire lives, and then they get to high school, they're really, really smart, and they get a full ride to a college that they really, really want to go to. Suddenly, you don't really need that 529 money anymore. Now, you have options with that money. You're not like, that money's not just going to be never used.
Right.
You have a flexibility with it, but by not fully funding the 529, it's less than that you have to figure out what to do with.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. Like the 50-50 split will always give you flexibility, and you'll be able to maneuver, especially in emergencies, in your own life.
Right.
If you're saving and you're earmarking that for college, but then something happens where you didn't plan for,
right.
You can be flexible with that. And yeah, with scholarships is interesting. Usually scholarships, sometimes they don't pay for room and board,
right.
and that's something that's great about, you
still use the 529.
Yeah, you can still use the 529, but over saving is a risk. And
sure.
So yeah, you have to be careful.
Yep. So and there's obviously other. It's not just getting a full ride. Perhaps they go to the trade school that we talked about, and that only costs $20,000 and not $160,000. So you don't want to have so much in a 529 that you're just stuck with a really big account that you really don't need.
Yeah.
So think about the investment returns then in that account as well. So that's going to hopefully keep up with inflation. That if not exceed it a little bit. Hopefully exceed it.
Yeah.
So you can somewhat do the math and think about it in today's dollars, because you're theoretically getting investment returns as the inflation increases on the college expense as well. We tend to assume a pretty conservative 6 to 7% on the funds that are going into a 529. We're not getting super aggressive in these accounts and looking at 9% returns or anything like that. We try to keep it a little bit more conservative there. So what the reason why this is so helpful, let's talk about what happens if you overfund a 529, and what are your options in this situation where they go to a school that's cheaper, they don't go to school at all, or they get a full ride or something like that, and you have a lot of money in a 529 that you're not ultimately going to need to use for your kid's college expense. What are some things that they can do with the 529 money?
Yeah, so with the 529, you can remove or roll over $35,000 into your own Roth IRA, right? It's not the kids. It would be
No, I think it's the kids.
It is the kids.
I think
okay.
So, yes.
Okay. So you can.
I think it has to be.
Okay. So you can roll over $35,000 into the kids' Roth IRA, which would be incredibly beneficial.
It's sweet. Yeah.
In the sense of setting them up. Let's say they're still under 21 or around that age. You're setting them up well for the next 30 or 40 years before retirement. So that's great, and Roths can be flexible on the side of being able to, remove $10,000 of earnings for a home purchase or something like that. So that's great. But the other, another option is that.
Sorry, real quick on the Roth.
Yes.
Can you do it all? You can do that $35,000 all at once?
I do not know.
No, you can't. Okay. You're still subject to annual contribution limits on the Roth. So even though you can do $35,000 lifetime, you still are subject. It's $7,500 in 2026 that you could roll over that this year, and then next year do it again, whatever the limit's going to be, the contribution limit's going to be next year until you hit that $35,000.
Sure.
So yeah, you are still subject to that.
Yeah. So you can't.
It'll take a few years.
Yeah. Can't do it all at once.
What else could you do in a 529 if you have?
Yeah, the nice thing is that you can change the beneficiary or move the funds to a different beneficiary, and so that decreases the risk. Again, we were talking about earlier of a child not going to college or something like that. That is huge, and it's almost surprising that they even allow it, but they do, which is awesome, because then if you have more than one child and one of them does and one of them doesn't, then you just have benefited the one that does immensely. You can also, I believe, change the beneficiary to a grandchild eventually. And I think there may be, gift tax or generation skipping tax, but that kind of stuff you wouldn't really have to worry about. Most people wouldn't have to worry, I should say. Let's say that's really flexible. So you can change the beneficiary. Is there anything else?
I think the kind of the last resort would be just withdrawing the money and taking the penalty. Yeah. So it's a 10% penalty on the earnings in that account, and that's not, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. If you ultimately are just like, I have all this money in 529, I have nobody else that I want to switch the beneficiary. I had one kid, or like the other kid is already paid for, so let's just withdraw it and use it for whatever we need it for, and just take that hit on the penalty.
Right.
So
do you have to pay taxes after, like if you remove it and you have to pay the 10%? Don't you already also have to pay taxes on the funds, or because like an HSA,
right?
An HSA, you do it, like essentially HSA, once you hit 65, I think it turns into an IRA essentially.
Right.
So it loses its tax-free status for non-qualified. So there's no penalty, but then you have to pay income taxes. Is that the same for 529? I do not
does that
know.
happen with an HSA? At 65, it just turns to an IRA.
Yeah. Well, there's no 10%.
But if you're still using it for qualified medical,
you're good.
Yeah.
You're good. Okay. But then there's just no penalty. But then you still do have to pay. If you don't use it for qualified, you do still have to pay income taxes on it.
We should. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't
either.
I don't know.
We should know that.
Yeah, we should have known that. But so that's it. Those are your options if you overfund a 529. What if you underfund it? What are some things that we can do if we just didn't save enough or didn't have enough time? We just couldn't set enough aside. what do we do if we have underfunded our kids' college education by the time they start school?
Yeah. So this is where I think there's a wide variety of options depending upon your AGI, especially that can be one of the biggest catalysts, and then FAFSA as well once you apply for that. So that's what you have to look at the start there. This is where most people, I would say, are going to be, in the sense of underfunding, and underfunding is not a negative thing. And so when you hear that term, I would say you don't want to get to retirement and necessarily be underfunded, but with education planning, exactly, it's not the end of the world. Not that it really is in retirement either, but with education, it's okay to be underfunded. And so, scholarships are the place where, that's going to be super beneficial if your kid worked really hard and they, are smart, or everyone thinks they're smart, and they get, a scholarship. That would be perfect, because then you don't have to take out loans. And that's another one, which, there's subsidized, there's unsubsidized. And those loans can be taken on by the subsidized, can be taken on by, I guess both can be taken on by the child, the person who's going to college, and then you can do a parent loan as well.
Right.
And so you have people are always willing to loan you money just at a certain amount of interest. And so you're always going to find options. It's just there are better options than others. And so you have to be aware of that. And so those are some, and then there are tax credits as well, which can be super beneficial. And I was, just brushing up on that this morning. And those tax credits, there's two main ones, and the first is the American Opportunity Credit, and that one is only for the first 4 years, so it's undergraduate, and then there's lifetime learning credit as well, which is for undergraduate, graduate, and then some other potentially can be used for professional development as well, depending upon the school that you go to or whatever. So I could get in more details with some of that stuff, but those are some other options.
Yeah. So if you're at a point where you've saved up $50,000 in that 529, and you weren't able to save any more into a taxable account or anything, and that's what you've earmarked for your kids, and you can just tell them, hey, you're approaching college. We're so excited for you. We have $50,000 set aside for your college education. Anything beyond that, we'll help you figure out how to pay for it, but it's essentially going to be your responsibility through loans, through scholarships and grants to figure out. And so that could influence the college decision, and you go, all right, a way to make school cheaper would be like community college for a few years before transferring to the school that you would want to go to. Not everybody might want to do that. They might want to get the full 4-year experience somewhere, which is totally legitimate. And so it's just going to be, require some flexibility on the kid's part, or just an understanding and making sure you're just having these conversations early with your kids, so that you both go into it with eyes wide open and understanding, and that no feelings are hurt or anything. It's just, this is the reality of what we have available, and you'll be on your own from that point on. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I think that's a really good opportunity for the kid to start exercising financial wisdom in their own life, where they're not making a poor decision and putting themselves in an extreme amount of debt that will be difficult to get out from underneath when they graduate. We mentioned this in one of our episodes about major purchases. I think a good rule of thumb is don't take out any more student loans than what you expect to earn in your first year of working in your career. So whatever career you're trying to pursue, look at what the average income is going to be, the average salary in that range. And let's say it's $50,000 to get an entry-level job in your field. Well, let's put a limit on how much student loan we're taking out at $50,000.
Right.
It's not a hard and fast rule. You could take out more, but I think if you can think in those terms, that might help you make a better decision with how much you're ultimately taking out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's good.
So let's talk about those tax credits a little bit more.
Sure.
So we've got the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Explain, do you know how much that is?
Yeah, it's a total of $2,500, and that is per year. Again, the American Opportunity can only be used for the First 4 years, so undergraduate. So essentially, how it works is if you pay for $4,000 of your kids, you use $4,000 and you pay for your kids' school. The first $2,000 is it's 100% of the first $2,000, and then it's 25% of the next $2,000. So that's how you get to that $2,500 number. And the detail that's really important with these is that it's a credit. It's not a deduction. It's not above the line or below the line, and that credit can be massively beneficial, especially. There are phase outs, and they are, in the I think 140 to 160 or, 145 to 175, something like that for married filing jointly. So they are a little low, I would say.
Okay.
So if
your income is above that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You won't be able to get
utilize
it.
This.
Yeah, exactly. So they are, I would say, generally relatively low for married filing jointly. Mm-hmm. But if you can utilize them, they are super beneficial, again, because they're a credit. So they're going to, dollar for dollar on taxes you owe, they're going to take away from that. So that's the American Opportunity. That can be used every year, but only for those 4 years. First 4 years. If you file and, you claim your child as a dependent, they can't. Your child can only claim the credit as well if they're not a dependent, if they're earning money as well. So you just have to be careful with that.
So if you and your kid are tag teaming, paying for college, you can both utilize that credit?
No.
It's
one person or one student per year. So
got it.
So you can't both tag team in the same year, but you could, for the first 2 years, you claim the credit, and then the next 2 years, your child isn't a dependent, and then they're earning money on the side.
Yeah.
They're still in school, and then they can claim the credit.
Okay.
So it's one credit per child per year.
Okay.
So you can't double dip there. You can't double dip with any of these, and we'll talk about that. But then the lifetime learning is similar, but the amounts are a little different in the sense of the max credit that you can take is $2,000, but it's over $10,000 of expenses. So if you're paying $10,000, you get 20% of that $10,000.
Yep.
So how much you pay, you're taking 20% at the max of $10,000. The lifetime learning is more flexible because you can use that with graduate, and you can use that for other stuff. And then the other funny detail that, not funny, but the other detail that I got wrong on one of my practice exams is that you cannot have a felony drug charge for American Opportunity, but you can with lifetime.
Is that right?
Yep.
How about that?
Random, but
okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So that's great. What are some coordination strategies to utilize all these together? Like you for instance, you cannot use tax-free 529 distributions and a tax credit to cover the same dollar of expense.
Yeah.
So you can't double dip there.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the danger of these, or just something that you need to be very aware of. So, you can't double dip with any of these. You can't even double dip with a UTMA and a 529, for example. Like, none of these can be used and doubled up. And so I think you want to look at your plan, and I think talk to an advisor, but you also really want to talk to a tax advisor with this, because what is going to save you the most, especially if you're looking, if you're 2 years before college and one of those years you expect to be able to have the credit, and another year you can't. Yeah. You really want to look at, okay, well then when am I going to use the 529 or whatever it is. So there's an opportunity to really plan there well, but having all the information beforehand is really helpful, because you cannot double dip. And so
this is one of the reasons why that 50-50 funding in a 529 and a taxable account, not an UTMA account, but your own taxable account, is really helpful, because you can pay the first $4,000 in a year out of that taxable account and unlock that tax credit.
Yep.
And then pay the rest through the 529.
Exactly.
So it's just helpful to not fully fund a 529 for this, that reason.
That's exactly right. You know, you could lose your job in a year, and that completely opens the door to these credits, for example.
Right.
And you know, even in that situation, having that taxable is probably going to be really helpful for you personally.
Yeah.
And so being flexible there is really helpful. Yeah.
So if you're a high net worth or a high earner, you don't really need to worry about these tax credits. You really just fund the 529 in the taxable account and just kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So as we kind of wrap things up, let's kind of recap where we've been. We've talked about a lot of stuff here,
Sure.
and we've kind of been all over the place, which has been great. I appreciate all that you've helped us understand here. But let's first determine if our kid is built for the college life.
Exactly.
Is he going to do that? Is she going to do that?
Yep.
And do we want to help them with that? That's the first thing you kind of need to determine.
Are we able to help?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we want to, and are we able?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Let's do the 50-50 rule. Let's utilize the 529s for the tax wins, but let's keep a taxable account being pretty well funded as well. For life happens, and we might need to pivot some of these what we're using this for. So having the taxable account is going to give you that maximum flexibility.
Right. Yep.
And then there's the safety valve of the Roth rollover. $35,000 again can be rolled over from an overfunded 529. Lifetime into a Roth, again, subject to annual contribution limits. So you have an extra $35,000 in wiggle room in that 529 of overfunding possibilities. And if you go beyond that, again, we talked about changing beneficiaries and different things you can do there. But maybe consider, if you're concerned about overfunding, you've got $35,000 of wiggle room there.
Yeah.
That could be converted to Roth.
And considering helping your child out a lot with their retirement plan right off the bat.
Totally.
It's awesome.
100%. So run those numbers. You can look up like a financial calculator online to figure out how to inflate numbers over the years and figure out what that number means for how much you need to save on a monthly basis or a yearly basis into 529s and taxable accounts so you can get that number correctly.
Just play around with it, I feel like, in the sense of, you know, you don't know what the inflation rate for college is going to be, and you don't know what the growth rate is going to be. So it is helpful to kind of play around with those numbers. What if there's only a spread of 1%, you know, for 10 years?
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
What if there's a spread of 4%?
Sure.
You know, in this, when I say spread, I mean, you know, for example, college inflation is 4%, and then the investment or growth rate is 8%. You know,
Yeah.
What is that? If that's you know, a smaller spread, then, you know, you're just gonna not have as much, or you're gonna see the college price continue to increase with your growth. So you know, playing around with the numbers and running them, you know, with different scenarios is something that, you know, is really helpful. And I think you can see what, you know, a bad situation looks like and what a great situation looks like. And it's something that we just don't know what's going to happen. You know, if we look, it would be funny to look back on, you know, some people's plans 15 years ago, let's say, and look at what people were planning on now sending their kids
for sure
in 2026.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably there's probably some things that they didn't expect. So just being ready for the unexpected, I think, in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to a financial advisor who can help you think through this. We do this all the time for parents to help them think through. Here's what you need to save. Like we can run that math for you and just tell you, put this much per month into a 529, put this much into a taxable account, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, all things being equal. Talk to your kids. This is probably the biggest thing that we can encourage you is just have open lines of communication about this when the time comes. You don't need to have these conversations when your kids are 3, but as they get into high school, that's probably the best time to start. You're 4 years away from this when they enter high school. So start having those conversations early and just prepare your children for what you're capable of and prepare them for what they'll be responsible for, if anything, and just keep open lines of communication.
Yeah, exactly. And just encouraging them, you know, in the sense of there's a lot of different ways that they can go, and there's a lot of different ways to make it in our country.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the the college way has been really helpful for a lot of people, but I do think it's starting to swing a little bit,
For sure.
to the other side, which is you don't have to go to college, because that's where it was even pre-COVID. It felt like you have to make it.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Yep.
And, we see that in our world today where, blue collar jobs are increasingly in more demand.
Yeah.
We're seeing, construction and all this stuff with AI. So there's just so many, there's so many parts about this where, I've been reading the Wall Street Journal of parents who are executives at AI companies having conversations with their kids about like, what do we do? Where do you go to college, or what do you do with your life if AI really does take over a lot of the data entry, white collar jobs and this kind of stuff. So, our world is changing and it changes rapidly, and we don't know exactly what it's going to change to, but continually having these conversations early on, I think is just like, it is just going to be so helpful in finding and helping kids find what they enjoy.
Yeah.
It's just going to benefit them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Sam. This was a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the pod, and it was great talking about college with you.
Of course. Yeah. Happy to be here.
Cool. Thank you for listening. Tune in again next week for another episode, and God bless. Investment advisory services offered through Stonecrop Wealth Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. This material is intended for informational purposes only.